Good evening, I'm Sarah Farsglub with the main newsmaking headlines around the world. His Highness the Emir receives Presidential Envoy of the International Coalition Against IS militants and his accompanying delegation. His Highness the Emir will inaugurate the third session of the 14th legislative term of the National Assembly tomorrow, Tuesday. The Council of Ministers strongly condemns the terrorist attack on the Egyptian soldiers in Sinai Peninsula. And clashes in northern Lebanon rage for the fourth day as the army deploys tanks and carries out helicopter-borne attacks against militants. Hello and good evening. We begin with the local news, where His Highness the Emir Sheikh Sabah Al Ahmed Al Jaber Al Sabah received at Sif Palace today His Excellency the First Deputy Premier and Minister of Foreign Affairs Sheikh Sabah Al Khalid Al Hamad Al Sabah and General John Allen, the Special Presidential Envoy for the International Coalition Against IS militants, and his accompanying delegation on the occasion of his visit to the State of Kuwait. The meeting was attended by the Deputy Minister of Amiri Diwan Affairs Sheikh Ali Jarrah Al Sabah. His Highness the Emir Sheikh Sabah Al Ahmed Al Jaber Al Sabah is scheduled to inaugurate the third session of the 14th legislative term of the National Assembly or Parliament at its headquarters at 10 a.m. tomorrow, Tuesday, the 28th of October 2014. His Highness the Emir Sheikh Sabah Al Ahmed Al Jaber Al Sabah sent a cable of congratulations to Her Excellency the President of the Republic of Brazil, Dilma Rousseff, on the occasion of her winning the election to serve another presidential term. His Highness the Emir wished the re-elected president more success and hoped the bilateral ties between the two countries will be further enhanced. His Highness the Crown Prince Sheikh Nawaf Al Ahmed Al Jaber Al Sabah sent a cable of congratulations to Her Excellency the President of the Republic of Brazil, Dilma Rousseff, for her re-election for another term as president. His Highness Sheikh Jaber Al Mubarak Al Hamad Al Sabah, the Prime Minister, also sent a similar cable of congratulations. In other cables, His Highness the Emir Sheikh Sabah Al Ahmed Al Jaber Al Sabah sent a cable of congratulations to His Excellency the President of the Republic of Turkmenistan, Kurban Guli Berdi Muhammadov, on the occasion of his country's National Day. His Highness the Crown Prince Sheikh Nawaf Al Ahmed Al Jaber Al Sabah sent a cable of congratulations to His Excellency the President of the Republic of Turkmenistan, Kurban Guli Berdi Muhammadov, on the occasion of his country's National Day. His Highness Sheikh Jaber Al Mubarak Al Hamad Al Sabah, the Prime Minister, also sent a similar cable of congratulations. His Highness the Emir Sheikh Sabah Al Ahmed Al Jaber Al Sabah sent a cable of congratulations to His Excellency the Governor General of St. Vincent and the Grenadines, Frederick Nathaniel Ballantyne, on the occasion of his country's National Day. His Highness the Crown Prince Sheikh Nawaf Al Ahmed Al Jaber Al Sabah sent a cable of congratulations to His Excellency the Governor General of St. Vincent and the Grenadines, Frederick Nathaniel Ballantyne, on the occasion of his country's National Day. His Highness Sheikh Jaber Al Mubarak Al Hamad Al Sabah, the Prime Minister, also sent a similar cable of congratulations. His Highness the Crown Prince Sheikh Nawaf Al Ahmed Al Jaber Al Sabah received at Sif Palace this morning the newly assigned ambassador of the Kingdom of Spain to the State of Kuwait, Carlos Satenz de Tejada, on the occasion of assuming his new post in the country. His Highness the Crown Prince also received the new ambassador of the Republic of Niger, Abdul Bubakir, on the occasion of assuming his new post in the country. The two meetings were attended by the head of the Crown Prince's Diwan, Mubarak al-Faisal al-Saud al-Sabah. Speaker of the Consultative or Shura Council in the Sultanate of Oman, Khalid bin Hilal al-Ma'wali, and his accompanying delegation arrived in Kuwait this afternoon on an official invitation from the National Assembly Speaker Marzouk Ali al-Ghanem. He was received at the airport by Mr. al-Ghanem, Deputy Speaker Mubarak al-Khrenij, Head of the Mission of Honor MP Hamoud al-Hamdan, the National Assembly Secretary Allam al-Kandiri, and his assistant Sami al-Shaya. Mr. al-Ma'wali and his accompanying delegation will attend the opening of the third session of the 14th legislative term of the National Assembly, which will be held tomorrow, Tuesday. He will also hold talks with the National Assembly Speaker and will meet with His Highness Sheikh Jabir al-Mubarak al-Hamad al-Sabah, the Prime Minister, as well. The Council of Ministers held its ordinary session at Sif Palace today under the chairmanship of His Highness Sheikh Jabir al-Mubarak al-Hamad al-Sabah, the Prime Minister. During the meeting, the Cabinet reviewed a message to His Highness the Emir from His Excellency President Giorgio Napolitano of Italy. In his message, the Italian President praised the outcome of the recent visit of His Highness the Prime Minister to his country, which presented an important opportunity to exchange views regarding regional and international issues of mutual concern to both countries. The Council of Ministers also took note of another message addressed to His Highness the Emir from His Excellency Professor Alpha Conde, President of Guinea. Speaking after the meeting, the Minister of State for Cabinet Affairs, Sheikh Mohammed Abdullah al-Mubarak al-Sabah, said that His Highness the Prime Minister at the outset of the meeting welcomed the two new ministers, Dr. Badr al-Isa, who was appointed Minister of Education and Minister of Higher Education, and Mr. Yaqub al-Sana, who was appointed as Minister of Justice and Minister of Awqaf and Islamic Affairs. The Council of Ministers then adopted a draft decree appointing Mr. Salim Muthayyib al-Udaina as Chairman of the Board of Directors of the Communication and Information Technology Organizing Authority, with the rank of Minister, and the Authority Board members Khalid Mohammed al-Kandiri, Walid Saleh al-Gallaf, Saud Khalid al-Zaid as full-time members, and Muhammad Jasim al-Tura, Muhammad Abdullah al-Kandiri, and Fahad Sulaiman al-Fahad as board members. The Council of Ministers also approved a draft decree appointing Fadil Sayyid Abbas Sayyid as Assistant Undersecretary at the Ministry of Oil. The Minister of State for Cabinet Affairs said the Council of Ministers also discussed political affairs in light of the incoming reports related to the current Arab and international developments. He added that the Cabinet regretted strongly denounced the vicious terrorist act in Sinai Peninsula in Egypt, in which scores of Egyptian soldiers were killed and wounded. He said that while the State of Kuwait strongly condemned this criminal act in line with its total rejection of all kinds of terrorism, it also expresses full solidarity with the government and the people of the Arab Republic of Egypt, and at the same time sends its condolences to His Excellency President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi, the government and the people of Egypt, as well to the families of the victims. Kuwait also prayed for Egypt's permanent stability and security. In other news, His Highness Sheikh Jabir al-Mubarak al-Hamad al-Sabah, the Prime Minister, received at Sif Palace today with the attendance of His Excellency, the First Deputy Premier and Minister of Foreign Affairs, Sheikh Sabah al-Khalid al-Hamad al-Sabah, the Presidential Envoy of the International Coalition that is facing IS militants, General John Allen, and his accompanying delegation. The meeting was attended by His Excellency, the Deputy Premier and Minister of Interior, Sheikh Mohammed al-Khalid al-Hamad al-Sabah, His Excellency, the Deputy Premier and Minister of Defense, Sheikh Khalid al-Jarrah al-Sabah, and His Excellency, the Minister of State for Cabinet Affairs, Sheikh Mohammed al-Abdullah al-Mubarak al-Sabah. The US-led anti-ISIL strike coalition held a conference this morning right here in the state of Kuwait, bringing together senior officials from the Gulf Cooperation Council states, Iraq, Egypt, France, Jordan, Lebanon, Turkey, the United Kingdom, and the United States, enabling them to seek ways to augment cooperation amongst the coalition partners. It also comes as American Special Presidential Envoy for the International Coalition to counter ISIS, General John Allen, continues his 7-nation tour to accelerate the process of global efforts to defeat the terrorist group. Our reporter Badriya Saleh brings us this story.
The Public Affairs section of the U.S. Embassy hosted a press conference today for the U.S. delegation taking part in the Anti-ISIL Coalition Partners Communication Conference held right here in Kuwait. U.S. Undersecretary of State for Public Diplomacy and Public Affairs Richard Stengel led the press conference. Stengel said the purpose of today's conference was a simple notion, not focused on military action taken against the militant group, but more a matter to discuss that the current U.S.-led campaign is the first but not only step in defeating the terrorists.
We're here to discuss the messaging coalition. I'm not here to discuss the battlefield coalition. And what we have seen already is that the military initiatives have been effective. They have staunched the Daesh ISIL victory narrative, and we expect that to continue.
The meeting comes as Special U.S. Presidential Envoy General John Allen visits Kuwait as part of a 7-nation trip to accelerate the process of global effort to defeat the terrorist outfit that has gained control of large parts of Syria and Iraq. General Allen is tasked to build an international coalition against ISIL, and while overseas, he'll meet with a wide range of government officials, regional partners, and multilateral institutions in support of international coalition efforts to degrade and defeat ISIL. U.S. and allied aircraft have flown nearly 6,600 sorties and have dropped more than 1,700 bombs in the air war against ISIL so far. According to U.S. Central Command, the flights for Operation Inherent Resolve include thousands of mid-air fueling runs, surveillance sorties, and 632 airstrikes in Iraq and Syria.
We are looking at the sort of tail end of examining their attraction. And one of the things that we talked about today is delegitimizing ISIL, delegitimizing their appeal. Part of what they had been doing for months and months is creating a false picture of harmony, a false picture of an organization that embraces values that include people. And what we're hearing more and more from fighters who have left, who are disenchanted, is that the Daesh ideology is bankrupt, is corrupt. That's something that we talked about today, about reiterating, about amplifying, and we are working on getting metrics and numbers, but just anecdotally, we think the attraction is decreasing and the number of people is decreasing as well.
The effect of the open-ended air campaign remains the subject of debate, with the White House saying the group has been damaged by airstrikes, while critics are pointing to ISIL's battlefield successes despite the raids. Today's conference aims to enable the participating parties to seek ways to augment cooperation amongst the coalition partners. The next step for the coalition is to delegitimize the tactics and false ideology ISIL uses in order to recruit new members, a tactic that Stengel says is already proving to be successful. At the Sheraton Hotel, I'm Badriya Saleh reporting for the English News.
Turning now to regional news, tension continues to dominate the situation in Jerusalem as Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas sends an urgent message to the U.S. administration, calling for them to intervene immediately to halt the ongoing deterioration. Our correspondent Fatma Abdul Karim has more in this report from Ramallah.
After withholding his body for 5 days, the Israeli occupation authorities returned the body of Abdurrahman al-Shaloudi of Silwan and conditioned the return of the body with a restricted funeral. However, hundreds of Jerusalemites broke the Israeli military order and took part in the funeral, which took place after midnight.
Thanks God, my son is now a martyr. When he was dead, he was smiling and his face was looking good. My son is now relieved. He rests in peace. Praise be to God.
The hours that followed the funeral have also witnessed clashes between youth and Israeli forces, which were deployed by the hundreds across the holy city to face the possible outbreak of confrontations anywhere, any moment, which many believe is what Israel is seeking, although it might have lost control. The Israeli Prime Minister said he will do what it takes to restore law and order in Jerusalem, even as clashes continued for the third week consecutively, leaving only the tension to dominate the scene.
هذا بشكل واضح من أجل حماية والحفاظ على
This is clearly is being done to protect the current coalition, since Netanyahu is threatened by more extremist parties. So he's trying to maintain his government and trying to send a dangerous message to the region.
The Palestinian president sent an urgent message to the U.S. administration calling it for immediate intervention with Israel to halt the escalation of violence and uproot the causes, which is the Israeli attempt to impose a timely and spatial division of Al-Aqsa Mosque.
The Palestinian Authority sent all its emergency letters to the United States, to the United Nations, to Europe, and to call them to put their offers to stop Israeli plan against Al-Aqsa. And I think that this plan it will be demolish all the peace process in the region. We should continue our process as Palestinian people to go to the United Nations.
Palestinians, and particularly those living inside Jerusalem, have been calling for years for a serious intervention that would put an end to the Israeli oppression against them. And now that the results are seen in this new outbreak, the Israeli authorities are seemingly replacing their lack of control with a stronger military grip, which is feared to lead to further deterioration. Fatma Abdel Karim, Kuwait TV, Ramallah, Palestine.
In other regional news, the Lebanese army has launched a fierce assault against militants, forcing a retreat from Tripoli on a third day of fighting. The Lebanese army brought in tanks and commando forces, whereas fighting between IS militants had intensified and spread to nearby areas. The clashes, which broke out on Friday, have so far killed 9 soldiers, 2 civilians, and wounded many others. Earlier last week, troops killed 3 militants and detained a local leader in a raid in the northern Deniya region, setting off the spark that led to the Tripoli fighting. Fighting in central Yemen between Houthi rebels and an influential tribe in the town of Rada killed at least 250 people over 3 days of clashes. Violence spread and intensified in Yemen since the Houthis captured the capital Sana'a on September 21st. Meanwhile, violence raged in the Rada region, an Al-Qaeda stronghold, which was stormed by Houthis earlier. The Yemeni president slammed the rebels for trying to take over the role of the state under the excuse of fighting Al-Qaeda in a bid to conquer more provinces, describing their acts as unacceptable. A peace agreement signed between the Houthis and the government has so far failed to end the fighting. Turning to Europe, Ukraine's President Petro Poroshenko says he will start talks on forming a coalition government, parliament in the next week, following an election that exit polls showed was dominated by his own political bloc and other pro-Western forces. More in the following report by Nadia Ali.
Ukraine's President Petro Poroshenko plans to start talks on forming a coalition government after exit polls showed his bloc emerging strongest in Sunday's parliamentary elections. He added that talks might last up to 10 days and Prime Minister Arseniy Yatsenyuk, People's Front Party, could be a key partner.
Of the election bring the firm victory of all democratic pro-European, pro-Ukrainian forces. And that give us a lot of opportunity to develop, to provide the reform, to present the program of Strategy 2020, where we have steps for the anti-corruption, steps for the rule of law, steps for the medical reform, steps for the investment climate.
Partial vote count today indicated that Poroshenko's party will secure a narrow win in the parliamentary election, while the Prime Minister's rival party followed closely behind. However, both parties share pro-Western postures and have campaigned on reform agendas aimed at pulling Ukraine back from the brink of economic ruin. Pro-Western parties look set to dominate parliament after the first legislative polls since former President Viktor Yanukovych was driven from power in February. The partial vote count published today covers only 225 of the 450 seats, and result for constituency seats will not come in for a few days. No votes were cast in two areas under control of pro-Russian separatists in the east of Ukraine. Donetsk and Luhansk were unable to vote with 27 parliamentary seats there, and in Crimea, annexed by Russia in March, remained vacant. Meanwhile, international observers expressed serious concerns over the effect the violence in the east of the country had on the election, with some candidates being attacked. The election completed attempts by Poroshenko and his allies to restore a status quo to the sprawling country after a year of turmoil and violence. As the election comes amid an energy crisis, with Russia cutting off gas supplies to Ukraine in June, in the dispute over unpaid bills, Ukraine's economy is still collapsing, with gross domestic product forecast to fall between 7% and 10% this year.
Heavy fighting has flared between Libya's army and IS militants, apparently trying to retake one of their largest camps in the eastern city of Benghazi. At least 130 people have been killed during the past 10 days in street fighting in Libya's second largest city. Libya is divided between rival tribes and political factions, with two governments vying for legitimacy since an armed group from the western city of Misrata seized Tripoli in August, forcing the internationally recognized Prime Minister Abdallah Thini to move to the east. Western powers and Libya's neighbors fear the conflict is dragging the major oil-producing country towards civil war. Most foreign embassies have withdrawn their staff in the summer, when the Misrata-led forces expelled a rival group from Tripoli. Finally, now taking a look at the local business news, the main indices of Kuwait Stock Exchange settled in negative territory upon the closing of today's session. The weighted index shed 4.32 points to read 479.59 points, and the price index dropped 65.2 points to settle at 7,317.17 points. Meanwhile, the KSX 15 index declined 11.39 points to settle at 1,168 points. The number of trades amounted to 3,398 transactions worth 16.4 million Kuwaiti dinars, with 149.5 million shares changing hands. Be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel at MOI Kuwait News to see our daily news bulletins again, including all of our reports, or follow us on Twitter and Instagram at MOI Kuwait News. That's all the news for now, but you can join us again for the news brief at 11 p.m. Before we end, here's a quick reminder of the day's main headlines. His Highness the Emir receives the presidential envoy of the International Coalition Against IS Militants and his accompanying delegation. His Highness the Emir will inaugurate the third session of the 14th legislative term of the National Assembly tomorrow, Tuesday. The Council of Ministers strongly condemns the terrorist attack on the Egyptian soldiers in the Sinai Peninsula. And clashes in northern Lebanon rage for the fourth day as the army deploys tanks and carries out helicopter-borne attacks against militants.